Good day, ladies and gentlemen. We have editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine on today to talk about his book, Moral Money, which is the case for Bitcoin. And I know, I'm just going to show on the screen here, I know that for some of you, this is really exciting. For some of you, you're really mad because there's something about Bitcoin that does both to people. Some of you guys are gold bugs. Some of you guys are Bitcoin bros. Some of you are both. Some of you hate both. We're going to discuss all that as we go, and stay tuned. Eric, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Kennedy. I really appreciate it.
All right, so we were talking before the show. I want to prove my street cred because I didn't realize the Bitcoin thing was a lightning rod. My group of friends, pretty much all, well, they're all trads, and most of the guys that I know, if they're into money stuff, they love gold, they love Bitcoin, they're kind of equal opportunity. I realized there are people out there who love one and hate the other, and they get really upset about it. So I just want to show my audience, I am not someone who actually knows a ton about Bitcoin. I do know a bit. I remember back listening to Joe Rogan when I was like in my stupid early 20s days, and they had the guys on the 2011, 2012 talking about Bitcoin. It was over my head. But I have read a lot of this book, and this is kind of a classic, I've been told. I was given to it by a friend of mine who's a traditional Catholic money guy. He said, read this, the Fed is a scam, blah, blah, blah. I'm convinced of that, so I'm open to hearing about this approach to money. So I guess, what is Bitcoin? What are we even talking about here?
Yeah, so really what we're talking about is we're talking about the monetary system we use. I mean, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And I think this is something that Catholics really don't understand, like fundamentally understand the monetary system we use. They just accept the one we have, the fiat system. And I would say that even applies to those more traditional Catholics who talk about problems with financial system, with Wall Street, things like that. I think they don't go deep enough, and including the ones who talk about like against usury. And you get some of that, and there's some truth in what they say, but I think they're still living. This might be sound like the typical trad stereotype, but they're still living in the past in the sense of not understanding that the whole way that the whole monetary system used by the world changed radically in the 20th century. And in the book you just showed, Creature from Jekyll Island, is probably the definitive book that kind of explains that. So really what we're talking about is the monetary system we use. And Bitcoin ultimately is an alternative. A number of people kind of thought that would be a good idea to create an alternative other than gold. And I'll explain why in a minute, why not gold. But like basically they're trying to think, okay, what's a way we could do this? They realize with cryptography, which is basically just the way mathematically you can keep things secret online, particularly, that they could create something that's an alternative, but it was very difficult. There's many attempts to try to create this digital currency that would be a new monetary system, and they all failed, and they failed for various reasons. But then finally, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that may be, he created Bitcoin in 2009 as a digital currency, and it was purposely created as a form of money that would emulate what I call the moral properties of gold while maintaining the efficiency and usefulness properties of our current fiat currency.
Okay, so let's break down some terms here then. So I know what fiat currency is. Some people might associate the word fiat either with Italian cars or with the Virgin Mary. So what is fiat currency?
Right. Catholics hopefully have a good view of the word fiat because they think of Our Lady and her fiat, where she tells the Lord, let it be done unto me according to thy word. And essentially what fiat means is let it be done. And so when we're talking about fiat money, we're talking about government, 100% government controlled money, meaning they can just say, let there be more money, and there is. Think about something like a natural form of money, gold, silver, copper, or even something like seashells or whatever the case may be. You can't just create new gold, for example, out of nothing. You have to mine it. You have to spend energy. You have to spend time. You have to spend money in order to create basically not creating new gold, to mine new gold. With fiat money, All you need to do is just simply basically tap a few keystrokes. A government, if you're the right government official, right Fed official, and now there's more money in the system. It creates money out of nothing. And so that is what fiat money is. And that's really the foundation of the moral problems of today's monetary system.
So, this is something I've been thinking about for years. Because as I said, I used to listen to, I haven't listened to Joe Rogan in many years since I had my like reversion, a lot of filthy things on that show. So I just stopped. But there were some useful conversations back in the day. You'd have all these guys on. Used to listen to Peter Schiff sometimes. I know he's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
famous with that. He had a bunch of these Bitcoin guys on. And I'm the kind of person who really tries to think things through until their logical end. And if I don't find the end satisfying, I'm not satisfied with the thing. That's why I'm a Catholic. But one of the things, I understand the arguments that people have for certain currencies. But I remember one time listening to Peter Schiff, and the guy questioned him on like why gold. And he had many reasons why the functionality of it was good. He had many reasons why historically it's proven to be a good thing for reserves and whatnot. That all made sense. But then when the interviewer basically asked like, no, why that thing? Why is that thing special to us that we look at it? And he basically said, well, people really like it, and it's used for making jewelry and stuff like that. And I thought that's not really a reason. So I guess it's a more fundamental question of what do we consider? Why do we consider certain things as currencies, and what does it even mean for us to say this is a currency, and why do we agree on it?
Right. And that's a perfect question. That's a terrible answer by Peter Schiff, who's a very smart guy, by the
Yeah,
way. And, and,
yeah,
and he says a lot of things that are true. I would say, first of all, I want to distinguish a little bit between currency and money.
okay.
I would say currency is just something that's used. A money is almost always a currency, but currency isn't always a money. Currency is just a thing we use to exchange. I give you this currency and you give me a product. Money is more fundamental and in the sense that it is a store of value that it maintains value over time. But let me just explain why is gold considered like the premier form of money throughout history, throughout cultures. It's not just like one culture decided in one place. No, everybody decided that gold would be the form of money, and silver, and sometimes copper. Basically, what happened was, going way back, you start with barter. I have bananas. You have a cow. I would like a cow. You would like bananas. So we trade. But that example is on purpose, not very efficient. How many bananas do I have to give you for a cow? What if I don't want a whole cow? What if I only want part of a cow? But you're like, no, I can only sell you the full cow because I can't sell the rest of it otherwise. So there's always problems with barter, direct exchange. And so what happened was people started to realize, well, what if and this is something not government decided, not like a ruler or a king decided, but just people organically decided. We're talking about thousands of years ago. And they decide, okay, well, it'd be nice if there's some like third thing that we can just use where you say, you take this for my bananas and I'll give you this for your cows later, things like that. And so it had to have certain properties though for that to really work. First, it has to be like durable. Like seashells were used in some cultures at times, but that just doesn't work because they break very easily. It has to be something that it's gonna, if you give me my money now, I might not spend it for another 5 years. Well, if it's not durable and doesn't last for 5 years, I don't want to use that as money. It also has to be portable. Like there was one island society where they used these huge rocks as money, and basically just ownership of the rock transferred. The money, the rock itself didn't move because it was so big. Well, really, money needs to be portable. You need to be able to carry it with you, take it to the store. If you move to another area, you bring it with you, things like that. It has to be divisible. If it's something where, like, like a cow is not divisible. I mean, technically, if you're getting for meat, but let's say a milk cow, it's not divisible. You can only have one, you can't get smaller units of that cow. And it also has to be fungible, which is like the last kind of practical property. Fungible just simply means that one unit is worth the same as any other unit of that same thing. And let's use cow as an example. That's actually not very fungible because one milking cow could be awesome. It could produce a lot. Another one might be very like a very poor cow for producing milk. So they're not the same. One cow isn't the same as equal to one cow. So people started realizing certain things were better than others when it comes to this. And precious metals, copper, silver, gold. they all had these properties in spades. It wasn't because people thought it was shiny and it looked good on jewelry. Yes, that is true. People did do that, but they just realized, wow, this really works. People, I know this will keep value over time. And I know it's easy, you can divide up silver into little coins and things like that. So these things can be used. So that's really how money developed over time. I'm talking about before the advent of fiat currency. This is how money developed over time. And then there was a couple other properties that I think are important, but I consider them like more moral properties. One is the money has to be verifiable. What that means, it's not easy to counterfeit. You can tell, the shopkeeper can tell this is real gold. Like when he drops it, he kind of, okay, this is real gold or silver, whatever. It also has to be scarce, because if anybody could create it out of nothing, then they just basically flood the market and all the money becomes worthless. If, for example, you have an island where they're using seashells, but they're using a very specific type of seashell that there's not that many of. Well, then, but maybe there's a ton of them on another island. Some guy from the other island comes over with thousands and thousands of these seashells. He just floods the market. He buys wherever he wants very quickly, but now all of a sudden prices all go up. The value of the seashell goes down and it kind of wrecks the market. So it has to be scarce. And the last thing, this is talking about the 7 properties of money here. The last one is it has to be independent, meaning that nobody controls it. Nobody's like, okay, I will decide what is, this money, what the money is. Like I said, it wasn't kings or rulers or princes or government officials who decide what money was. It was just the people decided this works better than others. That's how we got gold to be the dominant money throughout cultures, throughout times, because it fits those monetary properties the best. And I'm talking about up to about the 19th century here, by the way, but that's basically how we got to where, how money came into existence, and why we pick certain things over others.
So it seems to me when I read, or read about Rome or visit sites and things like that in Italy, there's a period where they start doing things like clipping coins. And in my impression is that's kind of like the first inflation or whatever, or was it
Yes.
deflation, whatever the inflation was.
Inflation.
Inflation, because you have all these coins, and what you're saying is that there's confidence amongst merchants and so forth that this coin is worth this value, because it's kind of just, and that's one thing too about money, is that it is kind of just a natural truth that it's just there, and we all just kind of decide that there's a medium of exchange that we all agree upon, and it just kind of happens. It's almost like language. It's just kind of part of us, and we didn't really make it on purpose. We just can't live
Right.
without it. And but they start clipping coins to try to make more coins, and but then this just means the coins are worth less, and that comes to the scarcity. So with gold, obviously there's a difficulty in mining processes. There's a recognition amongst all cultures that the beauty is a part of it. I would imagine, it is pretty. It is something that looks like it's special, which is helpful for psychological reasons, associating it with value. But then something radically changed with the discovery of the New World, with how people looked at money, because, so here in Canada, we have our nickel has a beaver on it. Of course it does. But why does it have a beaver on it? I learned this just a couple of years ago. We were at a maple syrup farm, like a sugar shack for a little trip with our kids. And so when the settlers came over, it was the fur trade, because Canada and North America had insane amounts of furs that were scarce in Europe, but were not scarce in Canada. And they would go to this place called the Hudson's Bay Company, which was basically the company that made Canada. It just closed, actually. It's just closing finally. Sign of things. It's been open for 400 years and it's gone now. And they would go with all these pelts, and they had to trade pelts for things. So they made wooden coins with a beaver on them, and they were worth 5 pelts. And so even there's an example of, we know what a pelt is worth. Your pelts are traded for whatever, but we're not going to carry around pelts because that's impractical. So they had these coins worth 5 pelts, and that's why our nickel still has a beaver on it. But then when they flooded the market in Europe with all of these pelts, which were scarce there, all of a sudden now the price of pelts goes down because they're no longer scarce, which creates whole other issues and so forth. So it seems like this notion of dealing with inflation, dealing with scarcity, non-scarcity, it's very difficult to manage. So is it your opinion that there's something about Bitcoin that helps us to address that problem?
Yes, absolutely. Because what you're talking about, and part of it is the idea of what happened to gold. What happened to gold was over time, it didn't really always work out in the portability property. It's not that portable over time. I mean, because it just, gold's heavy and whatnot. And so what happened was they started doing physical representations, paper representations, particularly of it. It's the same idea of what you're saying with the pelts and the wooden coins. And so they had these paper representations. And then you could just get to a point where you said, okay, this is worth this paper. It represents one ounce, let's say, but then you could just print as much paper as you want. And the bank didn't have all the gold that they said that it supposedly represented, fractional reserve banking. So you have those problems as well. And so this the fractional reserve banking and the inflation, that's kind of the two pillars of an immoral monetary system. Because I mean, fractional reserve banking is just simply the idea of the bank is basically saying only holds a small percentage of the money they say they hold. Really, I mean, they so if you give $1,000 to the bank, what they do is they loan out, let's say $900 of that. They hold on to 100 in the bank, and that's it. So if everybody decide we all want to get our money out of the bank, they don't have it. I personally think that's fraud. I mean, I know that they technically probably say it in the fine print, but the fact is like they don't have the money they say they have. And then you have the idea of just being able to print more paper money. At first, it represented gold, but then eventually the government realized nobody even cares about the representation of gold and that's kind of a pain to keep up with that. We had to keep gold in Fort Knox at least a little bit to have a show. So finally, Nixon said in 1971, forget that in America, and everybody followed suit. Every country did if they hadn't already done it, where it's like, no, now the paper just represents nothing. It just represents that the government says it's worth this, and that's it. So all of that being said, now to your question about Bitcoin, the way it's set up is that you can't, and when I say can't, there will be people who doing it well actually on me, but I can explain it more in detail in a minute. You can't create new Bitcoin out of nothing. Nobody can go in and say, okay, I'm going to create some more Bitcoin. And so that's the first thing. So you can't have this inflation of just creating new Bitcoin out of nothing, just without work. I mean, there's a system for that happens, but a government official can't go in and just create new Bitcoin out of nothing. Secondly, it's much more difficult to have a fractional reserve type system because the entire blockchain is public to the world. Blockchain meaning basically how Bitcoin is tracked, who owns what. So it's the blockchain would say, I own X amount, you own Y amount, whatever the case may be. And so it's all public and it can be audited publicly, and people can just see, okay, this is how much Bitcoin is out there. And so if somebody started to say, I own, $1 billion worth of Bitcoin or something like that, and there's nowhere you can track that, you can't see that on the blockchain. And there are some people, by the way, doing this right now, and I'm a little nervous about that. But the fact is like you can always go back to the blockchain. Whereas you couldn't do that. You can't do that with paper, obviously. And you can't even do that with gold because you don't really know how much gold there is out there, and how much gold is in Fort Knox, things like that. But a Bitcoin company, for example, it can say, hey, here's our address. You can see exactly how much Bitcoin we hold. We can prove it. And so I think that's kind of like how it is able to overcome those weaknesses of gold and particularly paper money.
So if I said something like, it seems to me Bitcoin, hence why they use the term mining, it's kind of like a digital gold. Is that
Yes.
a way of looking at it?
Honestly, it's the best comparison, I think. I think there's reasons that it goes beyond gold, but I think calling it digital gold, I do think is the best way to look at it because it has those, what I consider the moral properties of money that really, I think the foundation, which is scarcity, verifiability, and independence. It has those three in spades. In fact, it's more scarce than gold because it has a limited supply schedule that it set up how new Bitcoin be created. And there's a maximum of 21 million. There is no maximum of gold because we could go to an asteroid one day and get a whole tons and tons of gold potentially. And there's more gold. There's always more gold in the earth to find. We don't know how much, but with Bitcoin, we know exactly how much there is in issuance, have already been issued and out in circulation, how much is still to be issued. And so it's very scarce. It's verifiable. Like I already explained, it's independent. Nobody controls the Bitcoin network. And so therefore it's not like a government official can determine how much Bitcoin will be created, how much will be taken away, or anything like that. So it really is like digital gold, but I think it's superior to gold in that, like I said, the true fixed supply, but also the usability. I can buy something from somebody in Japan and send them a bunch of Bitcoin very quickly within 10 minutes and they have it. Whereas gold, if I need to send any amount of gold over any uh, space, it takes money, it takes energy, it takes security, all those things.
So then, okay, so no one controls it. It's not like a central control, but at the same time, the production of it is controlled in the sense of it's built into the math of it.
Right.
So how does that work? Like which computers are doing it and stuff? That's something that I don't know anything about.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do go in it detail in my book, Moral Money. I try to do it detail in the sense of like not trying to lose people, because I do understand there are some complex subjects here.
It's computer science
Essentially,
stuff
what
that's above some
happens
of our
is,
heads, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, my background is I got early in on the internet. I was working for a web hosting company in 1997. I was the first employee working in a friend's basement doing this. And so like I really started to understand how the internet works. Most people have no idea how the internet works. But what you have is you have protocols on the internet that run things. So email is a protocol. I'm not talking about your Gmail program or your Hotmail program, whatever like that. Email itself, what that means is it's a set of rules that computers that are connected to the internet follow to route email. So if I'm sending you an email, what happens is my email program follows that protocol, the email protocol. I say, okay, send this email out, and it will route itself to the proper server that hosts your email. And it has a whole set of rules to know how to do that. And if you don't follow those rules, it won't make it to your email server. And your email server is like, for example, for Gmail, it would be Google, it's their servers. If it's Hotmail, it's I think Microsoft owns them or something.
MSN, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nobody uses Hotmail hardly anymore. But anyway, the point is that there's this protocol that all these computers connected to the internet, they have to follow. Bitcoin is basically the same thing. It's a protocol. So and a protocol is just software that computers run that say, okay, this is how we're going to do things. So if I say I want to send some Bitcoin to you, Kennedy, you give me your address of your Bitcoin wallet. I tell my Bitcoin software program, send it. And what will happen is it will be routed to, I mean, this is a little bit not 100% technically accurate, but it helps people understand. It gets routed to your wallet. And so what happens is, who runs, for example, email servers? A bunch of people, tons of, mostly corporations do these days, but it's like all the companies that host email, stuff like that, they run these email servers. Well, who runs Bitcoin servers? Really, it's just a bunch of regular people. I actually have one. It's called a Bitcoin node, and it's free to operate, free to download the software, and you can run it on a laptop in your house. And so what happens is then there's over 20,000 right now different Bitcoin nodes out there all around the world. And what they're doing is they're basically running the Bitcoin software and saying, okay, somebody just said they sent Bitcoin to somebody else. Let's confirm this is a legitimate transaction. Does that person actually have the Bitcoin they say they do? Is the wallet that they're sending to a legitimate wallet? And then we'll do our magic and make it happen. And so these 20 some thousand plus computers out there, computer nodes out there that are running the Bitcoin software, that's what controls it. But of course, I'm one of those 20 some thousand. I absolutely have no control over the specifics of, okay, I'm going to make it so there's more Bitcoin in the supply, or I'm going to deny this transaction like that. I'm just saying, okay, this protocol runs it. And so the people who write the protocols, they're the ones who writing the software. Basically, they're updating it. But here's the magic of it. You could say, well, they could just code in there, make it more than 21 million Bitcoin. And honestly, that's a super easy code. It really would take them probably 5 minutes to update the code to say that. The problem is they then have to get those 20 some thousand nodes to agree to upgrade their software to this new feature of having, let's say, 50 million Bitcoin. Well, I would imagine 99%, if not 100% of the people who run Bitcoin nodes own Bitcoin. And so why would they decide to devalue their own investment, their own money, in order for some reason? They're just not incentivized to do it. So what happens when I say nobody controls it, it's a set of both software protocols and in economic incentives that come together so that basically the people who do run the Bitcoin software, they have very little power on their own. But even if they all said, and you'd have to get all of them together to agree to something, but they're not going to do something that's going to devalue their own investment, their own Bitcoin. So it all works together so that basically it just kind of the software stays basically running, and it can't be easily and really almost impossibly, it can't be changed. So all of a sudden, if Donald Trump tomorrow said, "I want the Bitcoin supply to be 50 million Bitcoin, not 21 million," it would be responded to with some laughs and a shrug of shoulders, and we just move on because everybody be like, well, we're just not doing that, and we can't do that.
So basically, it's the opposite of a centralized currency. It's a decentralized currency.
Absolutely.
And okay, so that's kind of the protective measure of it. And it's not necessary for us to understand all the coding and stuff because most of us don't understand the coding of most things that we use, and we just use them. But that makes sense. So really, maybe the security of it is in the fact that it's not centralized. So theoretically, I guess somehow we could hypothetically imagine a scenario wherein all 20,000 of the people with the nodes and whatever could somehow be apprehended and they could destroy all their things. And okay, that's hypothetically, but that could be applied to anything. I mean, if we're at apocalyptic levels of fantasy, any currency could be destroyed and any grid could be destroyed. But really, in practical reality, it's kind of ungovernable, but that's good.
Yes, and it's very secure because the way it works is there's this process called mining, which we've talked about. And what that does is that's the process to generate new Bitcoin. So every 10 minutes or so, I think it's right now 3.125 new Bitcoin are created, and they're given to the miner who basically wins a race. It's a mathematical puzzle these supercomputers, these advanced computers are trying to solve. And so, but what happens is because it's so difficult, there's so many people trying for this because Bitcoin is worth something. What happens is that process actually secures the network. The Bitcoin network is, if you put it combined, the mining process and the nodes is more powerful than basically all the supercomputers in the world combined. And you would have to control all these miners in order to hack, potentially even, not even hack the Bitcoin network. And if you did that, then what happens is the value of the Bitcoin goes down to nothing because everybody's like, well, it just got hacked. And so why would you even do that? Now, people have tried to hack to get a little bit stuff like that, but it's incredibly impossible. It basically is impossible. I mean, as a software developer in my past, I can never say something is unhackable or it's 100% bug free. You just can't say that. But I can say for practical purposes, Bitcoin is impossible to hack and bug free because it's had so much time in the wild with so many people using it and trying to hack it, trying to find bugs. That's the great thing about it being it's open source software. In other words, we can see this, we can actually read the software that runs the Bitcoin network. And so everybody's been trying to hack it for 16 years. Everybody's been trying to find bugs in it, and they just haven't. There was one bug that happened, I think it was 2011, and they found it very quickly, and it was a tiny community back then, and it was fixed within, and actually somebody exploited it. I think it was like a miner exploited on accident or something like that. And they actually just said, they are the ones who said, we got to fix this, because they knew if this bug existed, then the value of their own Bitcoin goes to nothing. And so that was very early on. There's probably literally a few thousand people total in the whole world involved. Now we have millions of people with nation states looking at it and all this stuff, major corporations. And so really it's incredibly secure. It's the most secure thing out there. It's more secure than your bank account, because a bank is a centralized authority that can get hacked and has been hacked. And more importantly, the bankers are the real problem because they could decide to take your money from you, decide like the Canadian truck drivers. You can decide, okay, you don't get this money anymore. And so you can't do that Bitcoin. If you have what's called self-custody, meaning you hold the keys of your Bitcoin wallet, it can't be taken from you by any government official. They can't just go in there and reach in there and grab it like they do with your bank account.
Okay, so I'll say one thing and then I'll tell a little aside about the trucker thing, why that was so unfortunate with the bank account thing. So it seems to me kind of like a cooperative. Is that like, people, they're part of a cooperative for a particular industry, and it's in their best interest to not break the rules, because then even if they want to make their competition suffer, they end up falling with them. Is that kind of make sense?
Yes, that is part of it, and basically what happens is if they make an attempt to skirt the rules, everybody else sees it, and they can shut them. They can basically say, "No, we reject that."
So what's interesting about the trucker thing, you mentioned the banks, is so I've close friends and family who are in finance, and unbe- uh, unbeknownst to many commentators, the Canadian banking system has historically been kind of like a Switzerland. It's funny enough, people think of Canada as being very oppressive with taxation and stuff, but the actual taxation authority in Canada has no access to your bank account. It's illegal. The only way they're allowed to look at it is if they get some sort of court injunction because there's a suspected criminal activity. But that's the funny thing about Canada, is that, not that I would ever have any experience with this, but not claiming certain things for tax reasons is like a custom here, because they just can't check. That you have to basically be suspected of, like, I don't know, something with a cartel or whatever to get the proper court things for it. So when they did the whole trucker bank account thing, the only reason they were able to do that is because they used some wacky potential domestic terrorism legislation and kind of skirted around the issue. But in the financial sector, I know this from people that I know that are very close with, who are in some major financial institutions. The finance guys were so unbelievably upset about it, even if they didn't care about the convoy thing, because they have so many clients from the Middle East and so forth who like the don't ask, don't tell mentality of and the security of Canadian banking. So it even shows, just to say, that a country known for extremely secure banking and for investments and so forth, if an ideological crackpot has a temper tantrum one day, there's not really anything you can do to stop it. So the Bitcoin does offer some sort of safeguard.
And I actually donated Bitcoin to the Canadian truckers during it. They had it. They opened up a Bitcoin account and a wallet, and I sent them some a little bit of Bitcoin, and so, and I knew, okay, they're getting it. They
Yeah.
they're actually getting it. It's not just going to be taken away. So, but yeah, absolutely. That in fact, Bitcoin is sometimes nicknamed freedom money because of the fact that it allows you to do this. And this is something that I people in America, and probably in Canada as well, they just assume their banks are safe, that their money is safe, that their actual. To be honest, a lot of people actually think their money they give to the bank, it actually sits in the bank physically, which of course it does not
It
happen.
doesn't.
But like, I mean, a good example was about maybe 10 or 15 years ago in Greece, when they were having all those financial problems, that they did what they called a haircut. Basically, the government decided that anybody who had over, like, I think it was like 100,000 euros in their bank account, they would take 10% above that. Just take it off the top. And so literally you just had less money in your bank account one day simply because your government was incompetent and had run you into the ground financially, the whole country. And so they needed to get bailed out. And that's how they did it. And the idea that that couldn't happen here or in Canada, I mean, give me a break. Of course it could. And so that is really, Bitcoin is a big answer to that, because it's very difficult to take it. And I know some people will argue for gold for that same reason. And I'm pro gold. I love gold. I have no problems with gold. But practically speaking, it's a lot harder to secure your gold than it is to secure your Bitcoin. And like you said, when you have your apocalyptic type standard, stuff like that, anybody with a gun takes your gold. And now they could take your Bitcoin potentially, but there are ways that you can secure it easier than gold. And if you want to actually use your gold, like you decide, okay, I'm going to go somewhere and spend my gold somewhere, I mean, good luck with that. I just feel like Bitcoin is like gold plus. I mean, it's got those good properties of gold that gold has, but it adds to them some more added security, added efficiency, and things of that nature.
So the term usury comes to mind, and this is a contentious one, because we know usury as such is a sin. We know that obviously usurious handling of money is sinful, and in the past, when we look at how church officials and various doctrines, and people need to understand, this, but there are a lot of things. Basically, if something is not defined and there isn't some sort of stamped it, locked it, can't erase it, ruling by the church. Of course, we're supposed to go with the common opinion and the perennial tradition, but there are certain scenarios wherein, certain factors come up that there's a new piece of information. Let's say if it's something that applies to political action or civil organization and things like that, where we kind of have to try to find a way to apply those unchanging principles, but with new landscapes. It seems to me that the usury thing in the past, when there really isn't a change in the value of a particular currency for maybe 100 years, or longer. I mean, the feudal system, which is unfairly maligned. I think people, our secular commentators, they associate the word feudal with not being rich, and it's like, yeah, but it was an agrarian society, so like everybody was part of the non-rich society because that's just how it was, and it's not really a matter of oppression. It was just a practical arrangement. But in any event, usury was easy to monitor because it was like, hey, there's no interest. We're not doing interest. We don't do that because the money doesn't change in value, so we just don't do that. You might have very small service charges and things like that for the operation cost of money lenders and banks. But now, that's gone. I mean, that's just, practically speaking, it's just not there anymore. And it's not there with gold. It's not there with anything. So now we live in a society, for better or worse, where the value of things just changes because it just does. And unless we want to do a great reset, God forbid, it's going to be that way. So how does Bitcoin fit into a Catholic understanding of usury, and how do we avoid that temptation?
Yeah, this is a frustrating topic, to be honest, because I think you explained it very well. Because there seems to be a lack of acknowledgement of how the monetary system has changed since the Middle Ages. And so usury, people want to say, when I want to say something like, how we define usury, people are like, oh, you're getting squishy, you're going against, you sound like the pro-aborts or the leftists or whatever. But the reality is, if you look at the teachings of the church officials and scholars like St. Thomas Aquinas, stuff like that, you see there was always an acknowledgement, even when they were very much anti-usury. There was an acknowledgement of what you just said, like, for example, service charges, because you're providing a service. It's costing you money, so you can pass that on to your customer. Also, even the idea of lost profit was acknowledged by the theologians back then, about usury, that you could make up for your lost profit, potentially, and it would not be usurious. It would not be the sin of usury. But then, like, honestly, it becomes a point where, after the real advent of fractional reserve banking, of inflation, of fiat currency, things like that, it's almost like you're missing the woods for the trees, because the real problem isn't me loaning something out at interest. Because the fact is like, if I hold $100 today in cash, it's not worth the same purchasing power in a year. It's actually worth probably about $95 in purchasing power, which is what matters. And so if I loan you $100 and I say, give me $100 back in a year, I've lost money.
You need to
from
charge
that.
5% interest to stay at the treading water.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just to tread water. And we're not even talking about the potential lost profit or the service charges. We're just simply saying to keep up. And the truth is, nobody knows what the next year's interest rate is going to be, how much our money is going to be devalued. Something could happen, a COVID company. So it's like, what do you do? Because, like, people often define usury as these days an excessive interest rate. I don't really like that either, because what does that mean? If inflation is running at 20%, which it does in some countries,
Then
is a
20% is not excessive.
25%,
Yeah.
20% interest, or even a 25% interest, is that excessive? Whereas if inflation is 2% and I'm charging 25% interest, okay, we can have a conversation, but you can see how it becomes very subjective very quickly, based upon the fiat underlying monetary system we're talking about. And so really, the move away from sound money, from hard money, changed the whole conversation. What I think is the real financial monetary sin here involved is fiat system itself, the fractional reserve banking and fiat itself. That's the thing that we have to really, as Catholics, I think we have to go wholehearted against. And instead of like these kind of esoteric conversations about usury, I mean, fiat money is kind of a reverse usury in a certain way, in the sense that you're taking this money and you're just devaluing it over time. You're making it worth less, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to loan you $100 and give me $200 in a year. What you're saying is, I'm going to give you $100 and it's going to be worth $50 in a year. And so both ways, there's theft going on. There's some type of devaluing or of the money. You're taking something that really isn't rightfully should be taken, which is where the that's the core point of the usury teaching is you're taking something of monetary value that you shouldn't be taking. And that's that's what the government's doing is they're taking something of monetary value that they don't have a right to take when they print more money.
So, Father Fahey, who died in the 1950s, I remember reading in I've read a few of his books, and in the one, it was very interesting to read because he's kind of on that cusp of old world, new world. You know, he's born in the 1800s, but dies after World War II. And I think it's in one of, he has like a bunch of books and some of them are really thick. It's in one of the thick ones and I can't remember where it is. But he used the principles of Aquinas to try to demonstrate the difference between the various ways of getting a percentage. And he was very clear with the old school understanding of, interest for its own sake when there's no reason is obviously just a greedy concept. Every sin, for something to be a sin, there must be an intention behind it. There must be grave matter. There must be free will. This is how, it has to have those things for it to be sinful. And he goes historically about this is why, these particular things were usurious and so forth. And then he addresses, because he was very well read in just sort of the literature of the secular world to understand how things operate. He does address a lot of literature from the 30s, 40s, and 50s about the new banking systems and the problems with them. And he says there is a situation wherein, let's say I want to start a business, and you loan me $1,000. Our agreement is you get 5% of the profit of the business for the next 10 years. And he says, mathematically, it's an interest in the sense that it's a growing percentage, right, but it's a percentage of something that's actually been created, and it's a percentage of a value that's been made, versus the usurious concept is I just get a percentage because I want it and because that's what we're doing to do business. And he kind of made that distinction. Does that seem like a sound distinction?
It does. I like that. I would go a little bit further, though, and I would say that one of the things that, and this some Catholic economists and theologians back in like the 14th, 13th century actually were talking about this as well, but the idea of the time value of money, that 100, even let's take away inflation off the table and act like our dollars maintain their value. Is $100 today worth the exact same as $100 in a year? And I think if you just ask somebody, I will give you, and let's again pretend a world where there's no inflation. But if I said to you, I'll give you $100 today, or I'll give you $100 in a year, which would you choose? Almost everybody just would come and say, I'll take it today because I might be able to use it now. I have a reason. I value it more today than I do in a year. So even in a case where I loan you $100 today, there's a certain value to having $100 today versus having it in a year, which is when I'll get it back. And so I think there's something to be said for just an understanding of the time value of money that allows for some type, and it's kind of like what we were talking about when the church allowed from even before I understood kind of time value money, it talked about you can get a profit. You are allowed to have a profit because you've given a service to somebody in loaning them money. And so there is allowable. And so I think there's something there to that even if there's not an investment in like a business or in land or something like that, I still think there's a moral defense for a quote unquote interest rate, whatever you want to call it, that gives you more money than you gave them. And because there's a value to that. You're giving up that $100 now for $105 in a year, and somebody else is saying, I'm taking that $100 now over paying $105 in a year. So I think there's something to be said for that, where we get into, and that's why I think, and I think you see this is the funny thing about this is sometimes when I interact, particularly with trads about the usury issue, they pretend to almost like the condemnation of usury like changed with Vatican II, but that's not the case. If you look at how the teaching of the church developed on this, it really did. They did use different language, and more importantly, the church herself started to borrow money at interest and loan at interest in the like 1500s, and they never. if it really was this, if it was what they were doing was truly usury and the sin that had been committed, I think they would have been called out for it. But basically, it was just accepted, like, yeah, this is okay what we're doing. So I honestly, when it comes down to it, I have a hard time defining what the sin is of usury and exactly what it is. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying there isn't a sin of usury. What I'm saying is practically speaking, like there's certain things I would see that I'd be like, oh yeah, that's in that category. A credit card company that charges like 50% interest rate or something crazy like that in a low inflation environment, just because they know they can get away with it or something like, especially if they have like a government regulation allowing them. I'm going to call that usurious, but I don't know exactly how to
It's
define
hard to
that.
define exactly where the line is.
Yes.
And well, it's like I get in the mail every once in a while, from some private lender. They just like qualify for your $20,000 loan today. We'll give it to you in 48 hours, and it's 39% interest. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, thanks. That's great.
Yeah.
I would really love that. That'd be great to give you to have that and then be paying that back for the next 15
And it's
years. That's
taking advantage of people who would say yes to that, who are typically
it
in
is.
desperate situations. Like you
Yeah.
see it and you laugh, but the person who is maybe not well raised, educated in financial matters, maybe they have, or maybe it's the situation where they have a real financial crisis, something like that. They're going to they can take advantage of those people,
It's
and that's hard
oppressive.
to see that. Yeah, it's hard to see
It's an
that and
oppressive
not
thing.
know that something's wrong with that.
And then that does make sense back in the Middle Ages when you have a different monetary landscape, and then there are those who are feeding off of people's despair, and often employing, it's basically like a form of loan sharking. You know,
Right.
sorry, little side story here. I worked with the guy back in the day. When you have these summer jobs, you never know who you're going to be sitting in a truck with or in a kitchen with or whatever. And I worked with the guy, and I don't know how he never went to prison. And he said it was, he had a, proverbial happy or lucky rabbit's foot on him because he never got caught. But he was like in working with the Hells Angels and loan sharking and stuff. And it was preying on gamblers and whatnot. And whatever, you need $15,000 for the bookie and da da da. If you don't do it, I'm going to break your legs. That's obviously usurious and dangerous and awful and so forth. And there are more minor ways to do that, which are still very immoral. But the intention, I think, makes a lot of the difference.
Right. Yeah, I think just a reasonable, like I can't. Reasonable people would agree. If I loan money, I have a certain right to be paid more than I loaned you because simply I'm offering you a service. The money changes in value over time. The time value money, it's worth more today than it is in the future just because you have it today. All those things add up to it's reasonable that I'm going to charge you a 5% interest or even a 10% interest or whatever, depending on the environment. And I think it's one of those things where at some point you do just wonder what is going to happen. Now, I do think going back to Bitcoin, I think what this does is it can really change that equation. I don't think it's there yet. I'm not saying today, but what I'm saying is when you have a form of money that maintains a value and even goes up over time, what happens is like you can actually charge a more reasonable interest rate. In fact, I was just listening to a podcast this morning where a company is doing this. They've just started. I don't remember the name of them. I don't want to endorse them or anything because I don't know the business model fully. But he was explaining the way it works is you put down your Bitcoin as collateral for the loan. So you're putting down a hard asset for collateral, just like a mortgage. You're putting down your Bitcoin for collateral. And then what happens is if the value of the Bitcoin goes down, if your collateral goes down because Bitcoin goes up and down in price, what they will do is they will just start to charge you more interest, which makes sense. And it's all above board, like they tell you what this is, which makes sense because they've increased their risk because the value of the Bitcoin is going down. But if the value of Bitcoin goes up from when you put it down as collateral, your interest rate goes down because now they know their risk isn't as much as it was before. And so I think that's a very reasonable thing. Now, obviously, I don't know what the exact interest rates are, and those could be bad, but like that concept is very reasonable because it's backed by this hard asset which maintains its value over a length of time. And so I don't see anything usurious about that, assuming the interest rates are reasonable and things of that nature, because again, it's collateralized by this hard asset, just like a mortgage is.
Okay, yeah, I get that, and it seems to me the value in a currency. And again, this is not an anti-gold show or anything like that. I'm not committed to either, in the sense that it's a big passion of mine. But you've expressed that gold's great for its own reasons and so forth. But one of the things we like about currencies like that is, because there's a lot of history behind it, because there's a formula behind it, we kind of know what we're getting into, so it makes reasonable agreements much more possible. I think one of the things that in the early days made people nervous. I remember getting people telling me, what was the tulips or whatever in Holland? That's a classic one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's like the
Beanie
tulips.
Babies. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, okay, fine. I mean, flowers don't increase in value, but it seems that built into the math of the thing are these questions that people have been wrestling with. And that seems to be overall the thesis around why this is something that can be used as moral money.
That's right. And if you look at how the writings of Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy or gal or whatever, probably a guy who created Bitcoin, you see he purposely was designing it to have those moral properties of gold, which are the scarcity, independence, and verifiability. And it really is. And here's one of the things I know a lot of Catholics get hung up on, and I think they're right to get hung up on this, is the question always becomes, but it's not real. You can't touch it. You can't see it and things like that. We have an incarnational faith. Physical reality is very important. We're not, souls that just happen to be in bodies. We're body and soul composites. Our Lord became flesh. He became, he became human. So these things are very important to us. So I don't want to act like I want to address that because I think that's important. I think what you see is when you look at, there's three different types of money when it comes down to, as far as their origins. One is what I call natural money, which is bound by the laws of physics. You can only get so much gold out of the ground because of physics. I mean, basically, the way God created the universe made it so that the physics rules it, and that determines what you can do and can't do. You just can't. Alchemy is not a real thing. That's one type, is through the laws of nature. Fiat money happens through the laws of man, which, as we both know, is worthless, because the laws of man change. It's positive law. It's this idea of, we just determine how much money will be created, how much fiat, how many dollars will be in the system, what the interest rates are, all those things we're going to determine. It's the laws of man. So we have the laws of physics, we have the laws of man. Bitcoin is run by the laws of mathematics. That basically you have this mathematical formula, and I actually have the formula in the book that determines what the actual supply of Bitcoin is, how fast it gets generated, things of that. And mathematics, like physics, is part of God's creation. I know not everybody's a math geek. I get that. I am. But the point is that math is one of God's languages, in my opinion, because it kind of explains how things work. You don't have it. God didn't create a world where 2 + 2 = 4 some days and equals 5 other days. Like, was it Tucci? I can't remember which one of those Vatican crazies said that one time, that 2 + 2 could equal 5. It's just like you cannot change the laws of physics. You can't change the laws of mathematics. And so that's why Bitcoin really is this hard money, and it's real. And the other thing about like the whole reality thing, money is different from everything else in a certain sense. Money is only used to get something else. You're not, unless you're sinful, you don't have money just to have money. You have money to get something, to buy food, to buy clothing, to buy, a vacation, or whatever the case may be. And so everything you buy with Bitcoin is real, in the sense that I can buy a vacation with it. I can buy a house with it. I can buy clothes with it. I can buy food, whatever the case may be. And so the money being digital only, I understand it's a hang up for some people, but to act like it's not real, what it's doing is it's allowing you, it's the means in which you buy real things, just like any money is, because ultimately that's what money, the real value of it is the fact that you can use it to buy things in the real world.
Yeah, and you know this from my book, What Happened to Catholicism, because you helped me edit it. It was
Wonderful book.
yeah, and thank you for the patience and beating me with a stick over certain parts to make sure I change them or fix them. And but I make that I do the whole reality thing, and I talk about how we are one of the fallouts of our Cartesian world we're in now is we've unfortunately adopted what we don't realize is a form of materialism, where we believe that things we can hold and we see with our senses, those things must be more real than metaphysical things. But actually, the metaphysical things are higher because they're unchanging, which just means they're closer to perfection, and God is perfect. So they're actually more like God. And this is why our bodies have to be resurrected at the end of time and restored to their former unchanging glory, for them to unite with the soul, which is eternal, or which is immortal, which will be in heaven. There's a whole anyway, it's a whole thing in there. And I talk about in the book how even in any science, we get to the point where we know the science is sound, and I talk about this in theology and why Thomas is so important. Not that everything that Thomas ever said was perfect. There are many speculative opinions that he had, but the glory and the beauty of Thomas is the method that he gave us, which is the closest thing to something like theological mathematics. And why that's so important is because I can use scholasticism, true good scholasticism, which I can judge by scholastic principles to know if it's good or not, by the way, which is one of the beauties of it. And I can arrive at a reliable conclusion and a reliable truth, which gives me a sense of certainty. And that's so important in things that matter. So it seems to me that in this Bitcoin situation, we're using the unchanging laws of mathematics so that we can arrive at a reliable conclusion, so that we can have certainty. So it makes sense that you would say, just because you can't touch it and taste it and see it doesn't mean it's less real, because ultimately, even the things that we can see, taste, and touch, those things are used as representatives for a principle that we have to understand metaphysically.
Right. And you can't see gravity. You can see the results of gravity. You can see things that happen because of gravity, but you can't taste or touch or feel gravity. I mean, you can feel gravity in a sense of, when you're not flying off the planet or something like that. But the point is like, that doesn't mean that gravity isn't real. Now, we might have scientists who come up with some weird conjectures of what gravity is and stuff, how it works, stuff like that. But the point is, the reality of I'm not flying off the world is just simply a reality. And so you can test it. You can test, is it really true what they're saying? These laws of gravity, is it actually true? And wow, every time I do a test, it happens exactly like the laws of gravity said it's going to happen. Well, likewise with Bitcoin, you can look at the code if you want to, and you can see, okay, here's what it says it's going to do. And I can test it. Does it actually do that? Okay, I'm going to try to spin some Bitcoin I don't actually own. Will it work? No. Okay, I'm going to try to create some new Bitcoin out of nothing. Will it work? Oh, no, it doesn't. And we have 16 years now seeing exactly, Bitcoin just keeps on running. Every day, every hour of every day, it's this software protocol that just continues to run. It does exactly what it's claimed it will do for 16 years. People have tried to break it, tried to figure out why it doesn't, make it not work, whatever, and they failed every time. That's real. I mean, that's real. You can't taste it or touch it or feel it, but it's real that you could test it and say, okay, yeah, it does what it says it's going to do, and it's based all upon certain fixed mathematical principles.
So you mentioned flying off the Earth. So is the Earth flat or round? I'm just kidding. I won't make you get into that. But all right. Well, Eric, this is great. Coming up on an hour now. I'm going to show the book on the screen here as well. This is Moral Money: The Case for Bitcoin. I hope that viewers will be satisfied with the presentation here. I think it's been very thorough, and I encourage everyone to especially if they're into money questions and so forth, to take a look at it. And that's really all I have. There's a link underneath, ladies and gentlemen. Click that link to find the book. And before we sign off here, Eric, is there anything else that you'd like to promote or talk about?
Yeah, no, I just say with the Moral Money book, I would just say, even if you're a skeptic of Bitcoin, I understand. Almost everybody starts off as a skeptic. I would encourage you to buy it. And even if you read the book and at the end you're still a skeptic, I understand. I don't think you will be, but you could be. But I think the first part of the book, where I really explain money and how it works and the problems of fiat and why it's immoral, this is something I've done that's different, I think, than other Bitcoin authors, is because I'm bringing my Catholicism into it, my knowledge of theology, things like that. Say it's really immoral the way our system is. I think what will happen is, if you read the book, you will at least look at our current monetary system differently, and that will make you consider how you handle your own money. You might say, I'm not going to do Bitcoin. Fine. but you might say, you know, maybe I should do things a little differently with my own personal finances because I understand now how the monetary system works, how it works against me, how it works against the average person, especially the middle class, the poor, how it works against us, and might make some different decisions. So I think it's valuable even for that. I'm convinced you'll come away believing in Bitcoin, but I understand it can be a hurdle for people. And so at the very least, you learn a lot about money from this book.
Yeah, well said. And I can attest that just in my own life, like my wife and I, and raising a family, that it's impossible to. It's really impossible to separate your use of money from your moral decisions, whether it be household budget or the purchases you make and so forth. There's always going to be a moral consideration there. So it's really important for people to get that under control, even if it's just personal finances, because there are a lot of moral hazards associated with everything we do with money. So it really does play into your moral life, which is important, obviously, as a Catholic. So excellent. Well, thanks, Eric. This has been wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, check the link underneath for the book. And you can find Eric over at Crisis, editor there, and I have articles there as well. I've been told, Eric, that because I write for Crisis, that I'm a part of Trad Inc. So I want you to know that
I saw somebody say that. Yeah, you're like, you're on our payroll and stuff like that, and you're on Trad Inc.'s payroll. So congratulations, welcome.
Well, you know what? I'm going to volunteer my articles now. How much is a Bitcoin worth now?
About $115,000.
Okay, I only need a half Bitcoin per article now. Okay, so then
Okay.
we'll take
Because we're in it for the money, Candy. We both
Yes.
know that. That's why you're in Trad Inc. I mean,
Exactly.
it's for the. I mean, I get paid. Obviously, I get paid 5 Bitcoin every week for being editor of Crisis, and that it's good money. That's why we do it.
The real question is how much money is how much Bitcoin is the Vatican sending you to publish articles?
Oh, I get directly from Pope Leo. I mean, that's the great thing about Pope Leo being a mathematician. He understands Bitcoin. He is sending me directly from his private wallet to my private wallet to make sure I only say things that he approves. That's the way it
Perfect.
works.
The conspiracy lives on. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we got. All right, God bless you all. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.